We had a harder time praying for churches 4 blocks away than 4 states away. And part of it was just like this competitive streak that, I played basketball in college how do you get past that? Well, here's what happened. We made a decision. Any church in the DC area that's preaching and practicing the gospel, we want to be shareholders. We want to get in on the IPO.
Welcome to my podcast. It's Carey Nieuwhof here. Hey, thank you for joining us. And if it's your first time, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You'll never miss anything. And what you're going to get today is a rare dish. I'm talking to Mark Batterson, who you probably know. You've read his books, New York Times bestselling author. But we're going to talk about his business model. He has approached church planting very differently than almost anyone I know. He was a pioneer in this regard. And early on, he didn't build a building, he bought a business. So a lot of you are bivocational pastors. A lot of you are trying to figure out funding for churches. You're going to love this episode. It's a different side of Mark Batterson. I really enjoyed it. And I think you'll find it incredibly encouraging and maybe a bit of a different model. So make sure you subscribe. And right now, we're going to dive into some messages from our carefully chosen partners. And then we'll jump right into my conversation with Mark Batterson. This episode is brought to you by the Art of Leadership Live. Hey, if you are looking to level up your leadership and take your church to the next level, in September, I am hosting the Art of Leadership Live in Dallas, an intimate gathering of incredible leaders. And over 3 really transformative days, you're going to dive deep into your spiritual and emotional health as a leader. You'll get strategies for growing your church and reaching people and creating a much healthier future for you and for the people you lead. So this isn't a conference where you just sit and listen to talking heads for 8 hours a day. It's super interactive, deeply practical, and designed to move you forward. So we've worked really hard on getting the blend of teaching, connection, and free time well, so you've got the space to learn, process, and create a plan on how to act to what matters most to you. Last year, I was really impressed with the quality of leaders who were in the room. Blew me away. And that's because it's an application-only event. You got to apply to get in. And you can get in your application with super early bird pricing, depending on when you're listening to this. Only a few more days left for that level of pricing. So go to theartofleadershiplive.com to grab your spot and apply. That's theartofleadershiplive.com. And one final note, if you're an all-access member who's already part of the Art of Leadership Academy and you want to attend, you can skip the application process, get in on an exclusive member rate. Just sign into the app or your account in the Art of Leadership Academy, learn more, and get the special registration link. This episode is brought to you by 10 by 10. So pastors and church leaders, you know what changes are needed in your church, but the question is, how do you make them happen? Well, you probably need a process that unites groups and generations, not one that forces you to choose, right? That's why I'm excited about Future Focused Church. It's a new book by Kara Powell, Jake Mulder, and Raymond Chang. Their team at the Fuller Youth Institute has helped over 1,000 churches navigate change over the last 10 years, and this book is packed with the tested strategies that are going to help you do the same. Your church's best days are ahead, and this book is going to help you get there. So get your copy today at futurefocusedchurch.com. That's futurefocusedchurch.com. It's always a good conversation with Mark Batterson in the house. Mark, good to have you back.
Carey, fun. Here we go again.
Yeah. So I told you I want to take a totally different track this time. And I want to talk about entrepreneurship and the kingdom. I get so many questions from young leaders who are bivocational. You're not technically bivo, like you've always been a full-time pastor, but you have a revenue model. I mean, you're in a very expensive city. I guess, was DC cheap in the 90s when you started?
Carey, I'll answer it this way. It was, property was $10 million an acre, and that was cheap.
Wow. Even in the 90s.
Yeah, there were 5 acres that went for sale right next to Union Station. It sold for $50 million. It's now the Security and Exchange Commission, which, by the way, is kitty corner to Ebenezer's Coffeehouse, which is one reason why location, that Coffeehouse has done so well.
Incredible. Okay, so it was always an expensive city. You started in the mid-90s, and there's an entrepreneurial side to NCC, your church, that I think people kind of know about, but we don't explore a lot. So when did you first sense that you might have a different model to funding ministry? When was that part of the original vision? Did you back yourself into it? How did that work out?
Well, we have a core conviction that there are ways of doing church that no one's thought of yet. And I better put this out there kind of at the beginning. We're orthodox in theology, but we're pretty unorthodox in praxis. Like we've always, for many years meeting in movie theaters, popcorn was our incense, Carey. Like that's how we did church. And I also want to say, like, I think our house of prayer on Thursday nights is the most important thing that we do. I love preaching the Bible. These are things that I love to do. But the entrepreneurial piece, I just think this is an original to me. When in doubt, probably Craig Rochelle said it, right?
Yeah, it all just blows back up to Craig.
If you want to reach people no one's reaching, you might have to do what no one's doing. And so we have a very curated philosophy of ministry that over the years, listen, every church ought to be great at the Great Commandment, great at the Great Commission. All of us ought to be making disciples. But then every church has unique church print. And I think part of what is unique to us is that we always felt like if the kingdom of God had departments, we would apply for research and development. That's what rings our bell. We love trying new things, doing new things, and I get bored easily. And so the multi-site model scratched that itch for a long time. And now real estate development, launching different businesses' mission, those are the things that kind of scratch a certain itch. And Carey, we're both church planners, right? So there's this entrepreneurial gene, and there are different ways to scratch it. Some people start businesses, some people start churches, some people start, whatever else. But I think it's always been in our DNA.
Yeah. Okay. So did you have a funding model in mind? You started in what year? 1996. Yeah. Did you have a funding model in mind? Because I started in 95, a year before you, and mine was tithes and offerings. And that's basically how we did it. But you were already innovating. So what was in your mind when you planted the church?
Well, in fairness, when we started, we probably had the same mindset, tithe and offering. Yep. And we weren't self-supporting until year 3 into the launch. And that
so
first year,
denomination behind you or a network or?
Yeah, we had multiple networks. We've always tried to affiliate with kind of a cross tribal line, so to speak. So pretty interdenominational in makeup, but in terms of holding credentials with the Assemblies of God, or over the years learning from so many different church models. So we diversified in that way.
Okay. So it was a tithe and offering model. I mean, I still see it comes up on your social media account. That first Sunday, there's young Mark. What was it? 14 people or something like that? Like it's
19 people.
19 people. Pardon me. I didn't mean to, lower that attendance. I know that's really important. 19 people. What was your first move that was different from the normal grid of just tithes and offerings?
Well, the first move was from a DC public school into the movie theaters at Union Station. Mm-hmm. And Carey, that's where one of our core convictions, the church belongs in the middle of the marketplace. This idea that, sure, Jesus went into the temple and turned over tables. He said, my house will be called a house of prayer. But what I'm describing is something very different. A church that stays within its 4 walls isn't a church at all. Jesus didn't just hang out at the synagogue, hung out at wells. Wells were natural gathering places in ancient culture. And so the first move was purchasing a crack house, turning it into Ebenezer's Coffeehouse. And we circled it in prayer for 5 years. And we didn't have, when we got the vision, we were less than 100 people. They wanted $1 million for that little postage stamp, dilapidated property, again, because it was a block from Union Station, 5 blocks from the Capitol. So we kind of got into the game by opening a coffee house, which some people, like, why would a church open a coffee house? Well, again, why not create a place where church and community can cross paths? And I'll go on record and just say, the Holy Spirit plus caffeine equals awesome. Like, I want both. I want both of those things. So it was kind of our first endeavor. Let's get our feet wet. And it was about a $3 million project, which at the time, that felt like it was way over our head. We're now about 50 million into a city block on the other side of Capitol Hill that we can talk about a little bit. But that was that first kind of stream of revenue that was not tithe and offering.
Interesting. So you had this vision. What year? How many years old were you as a church when you decided to pursue Ebenezer's?
It was only a year or two in. I was walking by that crack house, and I felt like that still small voice of the Spirit said that crack house would make a great coffee house. And that's when we started circling it in prayer for about 5 years.
Wow. So you started that a year in. And obviously, I mean, you've written so many books, including a masterpiece on prayer or two. But like, I remember when that story broke, because I was following you all already. And I remember thinking, to use a phrase that you might be familiar with, wonder how that's not sideways energy. It's not sideways energy at all. Like, a lot of people would say, well, that's a distraction, right? What was the vision behind it? What made you think, no, this is like fundraising, but it's also ministry?
Well, I just think a lot of churches end up very introverted, or they just don't have much influence outside their four walls. And we're a church that's been very motivated, more than 300 mission trips, and very involved in our community, including a DC Dream Center that we built in Ward 7. So we've always been a church that felt like, let's not measure it by seating capacity, let's measure it by sending capacity, and really by touch points. Like, we want to reach people who are unchurched, dechurched. And if you're going to do that, you might need to create, it's not sideways energy, Carey. I think it's creating side doors that people can kind of enter into the church in a way that's other than back in the day, that front door of a weekend worship gathering.
Young church, you were barely 100 people when you saw that vision for the first time. How did you get $1 million, let alone 3? Like, how did that happen?
Well, first 15 years, we only got one gift that was a 5-digit gift. In other words, one gift that was more than $10,000.
Wow.
In 15 years.
In 15 years. So you're like micro raising for that.
Yes. But here's where I would kind of seed faith. The miracle's in the house. And I think God knows what we need. And it was about 15 years in, someone called, asked if they could meet with me. I almost said no. You can't take every meeting. And honestly, the first hour, I thought to myself, why did I take this meeting? Because they were asking about church governance, asking all kinds of, I didn't know it, Carey, but they were popping the hood and kicking the tires. And after that meeting, they said, hey, we want to give a gift. It was a $3 million gift. Wow. And I'll never forget what they said. They said, we're giving it because you have vision beyond your resources. And so I always want to encourage leaders. It might be interesting for us to talk about good financial practices. Thanks to Chris Hodges, we only budget to 90% of the previous year's income. It's a very fiscally kind of conservative approach. But you better not let your budget determine your vision. Like, you've got to have a vision that's going to demand those kinds of miracles. And then they kept happening. And so we just, I don't know. I think God has blessings for us in categories that we can't conceive of. I think God's vision for our church is bigger than ours. And if you stay humble, stay hungry. Just
Okay.
watch. Just watch.
So there's so much there, Mark. I want to back up a little bit. I want to get to Chris Hodges. I want to talk about the 90% model and so on and so forth. That $3 million gift is awesome, but that's 15 years into it. So
yes,
we're going to put that at 2011, if my math is right. Is that right?
Yep.
2011? Yep. Okay. So, but Ebenezer's opened before then. So that $1 million was first raised in relatively small gifts.
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
And well, in 80% single 20-somethings our first 15 years.
Yes.
So listen, your chances of getting married if you show up to our church in the early days are pretty high. Like this predates dating apps, Carey. So we were like a matchmaker on Capitol Hill, but we always had I mean, one of our other core convictions is God's going to bless us in proportion to how we give to missions and care for the poor in our city. So we gave our first $50 check about 9 months in to missions, and we just never looked back. So we're at about life to date, about 27 million that we've given to kingdom causes that don't have our name on it. And that's our motivation. The Lord just spoke in no uncertain terms about 4 years ago, do more things that don't have your name on it. And so, Carey, we really feel like our mission at this point is to give a birthright and give a blessing. And sometimes that's financial to other churches. And we've just found if you err on the side of generosity, there was a church, and boy, it's dangerous saying this in this setting, but there was a church.
Get a lot of calls for meetings, Mark. After that,
yeah, but we felt called to retire another church's debt. I'll even throw this out there, and this, wouldn't it be amazing? And I'll tell you the genesis. The Lord convicted me. I had a harder time praying for churches 4 blocks away than 4 states away. And part of it was just like this competitive streak that, I played basketball in college and how do you get past that? Well, here's what happened. We made a decision. Any church in the DC area that's preaching and practicing the gospel, we want to be shareholders. We want to get in on the IPO. And so there are dozens and dozens and dozens of churches over the last 10, 12 years that we've had the joy of investing in. And then I remember when we moved into our current auditorium, a church gave us a $10,000 gift to help buy some seats. Well, we have flipped that $10,000 gift for other churches. Like if you begin to operate out of a heart of generosity, we've just found that the Lord provides. So, yeah,
that's incredible. And I love your vision. I love the inspiration behind it. I'm gonna take a real tactical approach. Okay, Mark, you know me. So what I want to do, so your first $1 million was small. You put some money down and then took out a mortgage on the Ebenezer's, or how did that work?
We sure did. It was a $3 million mortgage. Mm-hmm. And I'll throw this out there. When we purchased the city block for $29.3 million that we currently our DC campus, somehow, some way, a bank gave us a $24 million mortgage. Now, we had to put up everything we owned. I almost had to put up my kids as collateral. And it's crazy because we're now debt-free because of the Lord's continued provision. But we had to take some really significant financial steps of faith, including some mortgages that can cause a little heartburn at like 3 a.m. If your offering isn't great on the weekend.
When you took that $3 million mortgage, how many people were at your church? Do you remember offhand, ballpark?
Oh, it took us 5 years to grow from 19 people to 250 people.
Yeah.
So we somewhere in that neighborhood.
200 to 300, very relatable, big step of faith, but it was an income producing property, right?
It was. And we knew, we figured because of the location, we had a good chance of it being in the black year one, which is probably not always the case for a coffee house or any other startup business. but it was. And by the way, this is so fun because God doesn't just call the qualified, he qualifies the called. We had no business going into the coffee business, Carey. And this is for someone out there, because I do think you have to pray like it depends on God, work like it depends on you. Like, you need a business plan. But to be honest, looking back, our business plan was sending one of our employees at the church to work at Starbucks for 6 months to plunder the Egyptians and get as much information. Hey, just steal one of those Green Apron books, bring it back, and then we'll put our fingerprint on it. So we really, listen, if we could succeed at that, I think about anybody can.
So you were meeting in theaters at the time. Did you have any internal voices or even external voices, mentors, friends, colleagues who are like, what, you're buying a coffee house? Why are you not building a building? Like, you're supposed to be building a building.
You'll love it. One member of our stewardship team was a graduate degree from Columbia in economics, worked at the World Bank, and said, Mark, this is a terrible idea, but on paper, but love you, trust you, and let's take a risk here. So it's really tricky, Carey, because it's a multivariable calculus when you look at opportunity in the kingdom. You have to count actual cost and you have to count opportunity cost. So, we could have saved $29.3 million not buying this city block that we currently own, but the opportunity cost would have been far greater. So I think some leaders tend to maybe lean towards the actual cost. And I'm just wired in a way like and studies bear this out, that at the end of our lives, 86% of our regrets are going to be inaction regrets. It's the opportunities we left on the table. So I don't want to get to the end of the game and have buried talent. Like, I want to make sure that, like, we left it on the court, left it on the field, left it on the table.
Well, this is good. And I should say, this is not, those disclaimers. This is not financial advice. I'm not saying this is a prescription for church planters, but it's such a different paradigm. And I've been like taking notes for a decade and a half, 2 decades watching you. And I thought, this is where we're going to go. And I really want to explore it. Okay. So you've got Ebenezer's, it turns a profit. You're still a portable church. Talk about the expansion. When did you end up in that theater? The narrow one that's not in Union Station, but is it called the Dream Center Theater? What did you call it? I'm trying to remember the name.
Well, we ended up in 8 locations, and 7 of them were different movie theaters, including the Lincoln Theater in DC, which was we were there for many, many years, which was such a fun season. And life is lived in season. Leadership happens in seasons. The irony is that we aren't in movie theaters. So, Carey, we went 2 decades. I hope this encourages someone, but we went 2 decades in rented facilities. And our paradigm was that we're a tabernacle, not a temple. Like we when the cloud moves, we move. And God pulled a fast one on us and gave us this piece of property that was not part of our paradigm for 20 years. And now we've had to relearn. How long, Carey, how long were you at Connexus? How long did you lead pastor?
So 20 years, from 1995 to 2015, and then we're still involved. I've got meetings there tomorrow, but I'm a volunteer these days.
Well, so here's my question for you. Over 20 years, you didn't pastor one church. Sure, it had the same name, but how many different pastors or churches do you think you pastored over 20 years?
Over 30. It was, for 20 years when I was a lead pastor, probably 5 different churches. Like, we went through so many iterations. We moved out of the original buildings to an elementary school, to our first new facility, left a denomination, and then one of my last things I did was build our broadcast location. And then last year, Jeff, my successor, opened up an Aurelia location, 17 years portable in one place, opened up the Aurelia location, and we're looking to expand beyond that. But yeah, exactly. And I go there, and I don't know 3/4 of the people now.
Yeah.
They don't know me. That's awesome.
Yep. Well, and R.T. Kendall said, sometimes the greatest opposition of what God wants to do next comes from those who are on the cutting edge of what God did last. And so I think what's important is that you don't get locked into a certain methodology. And even over the last 4 or 5 years, we have started a spin cycle where we're launching our campuses as network churches. So it's a new day. It's a different day. And I think the game changes, but that to me is energizing, and it's kind of fun because you never arrive. You never really, it's like parenting, right? As soon as you figure out 2-year-olds, they're 3.
Yeah, exactly. So your next move, you're in multiple theaters now. You've got Ebenezer's Coffeehouse. What is the next move property-wise?
Well, then we bought a piece of property for about $8 million with a block of frontage on the 695 expressway. It took a miracle. And we had a charrette with an architect planned to build. And that's when CSX, the train company, said, hey, we're going to build a double-decker train tunnel right underneath Virginia Avenue, which is what the property was on. And it derailed us, pun intended, for 5 years. Carey,
Wow.
I was ticked. I was like, I can't believe it. Lord, how can we get this property, like have our architectural plans, like we're ready to go. And 5-year delay, but praise God, because it was in that interim that we acquired the Miracle Theater, just 2 blocks away, where we gathered for about 6 or 7 years. That's where we met, and where I
spoke.
think,
that's where At Your Best was born, in that theater.
Yes.
Where you wanted me to talk about something. I thought, I'm going to try something new, and I went to sit down, and you're like, "That's a book." Well, it became a course, and now it's a book. Yeah. Good memories.
How fun.
There, that was amazing.
The birthright is right
exactly.
there. And by the way, it's so fun. Over the last few years, we've incubated 3 churches there, other churches, and we've used Ebenezer's to incubate three churches. So about half a dozen churches in the last 3 or 4 years, which is just, it's so fun. It's not about the name over the church door. It's about the name above all names. And so if we're really dreaming for cities, there's just got to be this collaboration, kind of this commonality that we feel with each other. But that's a little bit of a sidebar, but I think it's important.
No, that's important. Okay, so you buy this property. Was that the Navy Yard property, or that was a different property?
So it's right across L Street from the city block. And so it was during that 5-year kind of delay or detour that, Carey, evidently God's vision was bigger than ours, because I mean, a block of frontage on 695, and at some point we'll build there. Right now, it's our parking lot.
Yeah.
It's our parking lot for this facility. But I think that this is where I would just challenge people to have a theology of the city. That Jeremiah 29:7, seek the peace and prosperity of the city. If it prospers, you'll prosper. And so, like when the mayor came out and cut the ribbon at the Dream Center, we were essentially cutting down on city services that needed to happen because we invested $5.5 million in that endeavor. And so, Carey, a couple of months ago, when I sit down with the mayor with kind of a cross section of pastors, I'm able to kind of shake her hand and say, Mayor, do you remember you came out and you were so kind to cut that ribbon at the DC Dream Center? And I want our city officials to know, like, we're not trying to just build a church. We're trying to bless a city to the 3rd and 4th generation. And that's where Jeremiah says, hey, plant gardens, build houses. And this is worth 30 seconds. A false prophet named Hananiah said, you're only going to be there in 2 years. But if you have a 2-year mindset, you don't even unpack your suitcase. You rent the city. But if you have an intergenerational mindset, if you're thinking 70 years, which is what Jeremiah said you're going to be there for, well, then you start doing things for the 3rd and 4th generation. So when we bought this city block, We spent $1 million drilling 109 micropiles 40 feet deep to reinforce the footers so that we could build on the 1.5 acres of roof deck above us. But here's the catch, Carey. We have no intention on building above the building, but the next generation might. And so it's kind of this idea of, can we set up, because we drink from wells we didn't dig, we eat from fields we didn't plant, like we got to return that favor. So there's a theology and a philosophy that kind of undergirds, I think, what we're trying to do here in the nation's capital.
So you bought the property, which is now a parking lot that you couldn't build on because of a variation. In the meantime, you purchased a theater. And if you think about an old school theater, don't think of a multiplex. Just think of like, it's probably 40 feet wide, 50 feet wide.
Yep.
Beautiful red velvet chairs all the way up, raked seating.
Art Deco with the original 1929 theater seats.
Yeah.
And
Okay, so that's a picture in your mind. Meanwhile, you're right across the street from where you're sitting right now, which is an entire city block. So what happened in the intervening time to, like, what happened with the city block?
Well, it was owned by Madison Marquette, and the recession, I think some of the
0708.
Yeah, that's what helped us get the first property, because no one was buying property at that point. And then there was just, Madison Marquette just didn't quite have the patience or the long view. Like, they had investors that you got to have a return on investment yesterday. And so they put it on the market. And the crazy thing is, an investment firm offered cash, and we did not. But somehow we got the contract. And I better backdrop it, Carey, with the short version that, 1996, August 16 to be exact, was reading Joshua 1:3. It says, I'll give you everywhere you set your foot, and just felt prompted to pray a perimeter around Capitol Hill. Wasn't praying for property, was praying for people. And, but 29 years later, we own 6 properties on that prayer circle. We're worth about $85 million, own them debt free. And Ebenezer's is one corner, Carey, and this city block is the other corner. And no coincidence, it's right across the street from the Latrobe Gate, 1799 Thomas Jefferson, original gateway to the nation's capital. And so I think what the Lord was saying is, hey, I want you to be watchmen, watchwomen on the wall. That's why House of Prayer is so important to us, because I would just say that prayer is how we write history before it happens. And God's done so many miracles that, I don't know, Carey, prayer is how we negotiate. Prayer is how we do real estate. Prayer is how we do business. Prayer is how we do everything.
It's an incredible story. So basically, the business funds some of it to buy that what's now a parking lot across the street, and then the capital. Madison Marquette, I guess, private equity firm or real estate firm or something like that. Okay.
Yep.
So they're selling it at a discount after the recession. You purchase it. Somehow, great favor. It's funny, we weren't the highest bidder on this house, which we bought 15 years ago. But God gave us favor. It's like we didn't have the money that other people did, but I think the owner liked us and, said, here you go, you can have it. And we've been here 15 years, just our personal home. Anyway, long story short, I'd love to know, so then what is funding that? Are you raising money the traditional way? How is that moving? Because very few churches own city blocks, and you're in DC, like you say, tens of millions of dollars to purchase these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we continue to get some pretty miraculous gifts, including it was a $14 million gift that retired our debt. And so, and I'll just say this, I think for every church we plant, we need to have business as mission. And that gift came from someone with an incredible mind for business and an incredible heart for the kingdom. And again, realize that's several decades in. That did not happen overnight. And so, so then this idea of the church belongs in the middle of the marketplace. Ebenezer's was the first expression of that. But then we built this property and actually branded it the Capitol Turnaround. It was the 1891 Navy Yard car barn. So it was a streetcar facility. And we just gutted it. I think vision is seen through drywall and drop ceilings that aren't load bearing.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew we could redesign it. And then we designed it as an event venue. So last year, 150 events. Comcast was here a couple of weeks ago. And, big name people come in and rent the building. What's crazy is they'll pay more for a 3-day event than our entire income, like the first 5 years. So, so last year, about 150 events, revenue streamed about 1.7 million. But if it's a partner like IJM or World Vision, or just local churches, hey, it's free 99. Come and use it for a prayer day, a staff day. But if it's a concert, conference, but here's the thing, Carey, it's not just about like a number or bottom line. We get to love on everybody who walks in our building. We get to show hospitality. We get to roll out a red carpet. And when they kind of incidentally discover that it's owned by a church, I think some people are pretty surprised. But we created a drop-down DBA, 8-day productions that controls and manages our portfolio of properties, so that we have events happening all the time. And chief of police was here doing an event. Like that kind of event is more of a community service or a school graduation that needs it. We'll make that happen. But what it does is it keeps us from becoming too insulated or introverted as a church.
Can you define drop-down DBA? Did I get that right?
Well, I wish I had our amazing operations team and COO here.
So is that just a separate company?
Well, yeah. So for different properties, I think it makes sense to create different entities in part to kind of protect yourself. Like our kids ministry space, we have about 20,000 square feet of kids ministry space that is childcare development Monday to Friday. So that's another kind of win-win sort of scenario.
Yeah,
so
you partnered with Phase, right? With Frank Mueller and Phase on that one.
Yep. And it's complicated when you have all of these different entities. And it's funny, Carey, the DC doesn't know what to do with us because we still pay unrelated business tax, but we don't pay property tax if it's church use. So we are so complicated. But I might remind us that that sin will complicate your life in a way it shouldn't be complicated. The blessings of God will complicate your life in a way it should be complicated.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's an important mindset. In fact, we could even extrapolate. I bet Tony would say the same thing as Laura, that when we got married, it complicated their lives.
Yes.
And we have 3 complications: Parker, Summer, and Josiah. What I'm saying is, praise God for complications, and that's true if you're in the business world, if you're in ministry. Like when we went multi-site, it was so much more complicated. But I think that's what you're signing up for if you really want to play offense for the kingdom.
Well, you know what's interesting too? Obviously you're super smart on these things. You have a huge vision. But the Mark I know is either always working on a book or always working on a sermon. It's not like you're sitting in the back room with spreadsheets and, I'm sure you're aware of what's going on. You've got a big vision. How do you delegate it so that your full-time job doesn't become running a childcare center, running an event center, running a theater? How do you separate that out, the entrepreneur, but you're really a pastor?
Yeah. And I sometimes joke that, I preach for free. That's the joy of my life. I love to preach the word in season, out of season, doesn't return void. God's watching over his word to perform it. So I love that piece. But we have an incredible team, and I think what you have to do is, well, I don't want to turn this into a sermon, but ego is the enemy. If you are insecure, you'll hesitate surrounding yourself with people who are better at you than at different things, and it will put a low ceiling on whatever that organization is. And listen, all of us are human. I tell our church all the time, as soon as I'm sanctified, I'll let you know, but I wouldn't hold your breath. Like, when we have a guest speaker, Carey, was it this way for you? You wanted him to do good, but not too good.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
it's like,
but we have some brilliant minds and just incredible hearts that have helped us get to here. And so I think you continue to delegate, elevate, and we're in that process again where I'm handing off a few of my titles, which I'm not a title guy. You can just call me Mark. But I am transitioning into more of a lead teacher and lead visionary role. And yeah, I used to do the counseling, weddings, kind of the weekend, day in and day out sort of ministry. But I mean, we have an incredible staff that does a lot of that at this point. And 29 years in, your portfolio should look a little different, I think, than when you started. So I've just taken on a few of the things that I just really, really enjoy, and real estate development happens to be one of them. Like 12 chapters in the book of Exodus were devoted to the aesthetics of the tabernacle. So, don't tell me it's not important, like right down to the color of the curtains. And by the way, check out Exodus 26:14. Man, I love this. It says, hey, in the ceiling of the tabernacle, put some dolphin skins. Now, the Hebrew there is very confusing. So I want to say that up front. In some translations, it's translated badger. In others, I think it's like, a seal skin or porpoise. But here's what, according to rabbinic tradition, Carey, when God made a sidewalk through the sea, some of the dolphins in the Red Sea, and we know there are dolphins in the Red Sea, they did not survive, and God told them to keep those skins, and then he told them to make them the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling of that tabernacle. Well, stop and think about it. Like every time they looked up, they were reminded of the most amazing miracle that God had ever done. If he made a sidewalk through the sea, we can believe him for the challenge that we're in right now. So I love the nuance in Exodus in terms of right down to the incense that would stamp the olfactory nerve. And we know that smell and memory are so interrelated that I just think these things are important. And I find a lot of joy. I'm not an interior designer, but I love feng shui. I love a space that sings.
Well, when you toured me through the new building, the Capitol turnaround, you were showing me all of the design details in it. It's beautiful. And actually that came from your mind. Like you spent quite a bit of time on the design of it. I imagine the same was true of Ebenezer's, true. Like you had a vision. So that gave you a little bit of a palette to paint with.
Yeah. Once we knew we were going to open a coffee house, I never went into a coffee house where my reticular activating system didn't notice kind of everything about it. And then I started visiting food halls and marketplaces, whether it's, Anaheim Packing House in LA or Armature Works in Tampa or Denver Milk Market. And I can even tell you spots where, hey, we did tile here, wood there, or different features that I can trace it back to the inspiration. So I just think the idea of designing spaces. Now, I want to be careful here because I don't know. I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but anything less than spirit-filled and spirit-led to me is dead religion. Like without the Holy Spirit, like we're just playing church. So I'm a guy that believes in the gifts of the Spirit. We need the fruit of the Spirit. So not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord. So you could design a beautiful building, but if God isn't moving and working and there isn't a freedom of just the wind of the spirit, I don't know what that is, but it's not church. And so I want to be careful, but I think it's both and, Carey. It's not either or. I think it's both and.
I want to talk a little bit about donor development. And again, you're not the kind of guy who probably spends half of his week meeting with key donors. I think I know you well enough to say that. But you said earlier, financial integrity and transparency is really important. What were some of the turning points to get those little gifts? And, everything is meaningful. Everything's sacrificial. Sometimes the $5 was more sacrificial than the $5 million. You don't know people's personal estate. But as you began to raise tens of millions of dollars for ministry, etc., what were some of the turning points that helped you see donors step up to the plate that way?
Yeah, let me back up one step and just say a turning point in my life for Laura and I was when I went back and took out the getting goals from my life goal list and we turned them into giving goals. And it changed our paradigm. Like now to give what we intend in our heart to give, you have to make a lot of money to give a lot of money. But our heart really is to someday reverse tide, live off of 10%, give 90%. We love to give. And so I just feel like as a leader, you have to walk that talk. Otherwise, it's going to ring hollow when you're encouraging people to give sacrificially. So I think it starts with us as leaders. Like, am I finding joy on the giving side of life? And then I don't think we were very strategic our first 20 years, Carey. I didn't know who gave what. And I kind of felt like that's a little bit of Pandora's box. And I still don't know who gives what, but we started a few years ago doing a annual gathering for financial leaders because we felt like it was insulting, like people who use their talent and time, like we honor them and say thank you to them. Why would we not do that for financial leaders who give their treasure? And because the truth is, they traded time and talent for that treasure, and then they give it. So, so we just started getting a little bit more strategic in terms of just different ways to say thank you. But I also think if you kind of walk the talk, so you know this, and I know we'll talk books a little bit, but when I write a book, there's about 10 books ago, Laura and I said, let's just give a copy to everybody at NCC as a gift, not from the church, and this is important, from us, just a personal gift. And I think what happens is you start to create a culture where, oh, this is kind of fun. Like you just the joy of giving, so I think people just started kind of stepping up, stepping in. We've only done one what would be called capital campaign, and
one. That's it?
Only one, and it's when we were purchasing this $29.3 million property that like we probably need to do that. Now I wouldn't complain if it's the last one we ever do, but
no pastor would.
Your mindset is critical. Like it has to be about helping people become more generous, knowing that there's joy as you become generous. It can't be just about like, hey, it's going to take X amount of dollars. And I won't throw anybody under the bus, but we had some consultants say, hey, when it gets to the ask, we want you to circle a number and kind of push it across the table. I'm like, there's no way I'm doing that. Never done it. Never going to do it. We're going to trust the Holy Spirit to move people and kind of touch their hearts to give generously. So it's just hard. It's hard not to sometimes lose your soul in a process that is kind of high stakes with a capital campaign. So guard your heart and make sure that you have some spotters in your life, because I was almost like being on the bench press where you put too many plates on and you can't do one more rep. It made no sense to me. Do you know the percentage of pastors that quit after a building project? Do you remember that number?
I don't remember the stat, but it's like within 6 months, is it half of pastors quit or something?
I
It's
think
huge.
it is.
It's huge.
I think it's over half.
Yeah.
And Carey, I never understood it because I thought to myself, well, once you get the building built, like now you're in the promised land. But I totally get it. It's so draining that it can just crush you kind of under the pressure. So I just think how we approach those seasons, we better be in a good spiritual spot before we go into those kind of campaigns.
Well, that's why I really was excited about this conversation, Mark, because you don't strike me as the kind of person who's sitting with a pencil in your ear and a spreadsheet going, I'm going to squeeze Carey for X number of dollars. You're the opposite of that. So I got to ask the question that everybody listening and watching is probably asking, which is, okay, one capital campaign in 30 years, and you've raised probably easy math over $100 million for ministry, which is incredible. So what happened? One capital campaign? How does this keep going? And I know you write books on miracles, so feel free to go there. But like I'd love to know the strategy behind the approach too. And if it's like just trust God and people will give, cool. I'm just curious.
Well, I shouldn't do this, but can I tip my cap because I'm researching the next book? We haven't even talked about the current book.
Yeah.
But the working title is Gradually, Then Suddenly. And it comes from an Ernest Hemingway novel. Part of why I hesitate doing this is whenever I feel like I have a good idea, I try to keep it under my hat until the book's actually out. So
nobody's listening, so that's fine.
Yeah,
we can cut it out.
We're good then. So in that novel, The Sun Also Rises, he asks the question, how did you go bankrupt? And the rather infamous reply was 2 ways: gradually, then suddenly. And so, Carey, this idea that that's how you go bankrupt, but that's also how you become financially independent. It's how you write a book. It's how you run a marathon. Frankly, it's how you do everything. It's how Pentecost happens. It's how Jericho happens. Like, it's going to happen gradually, then suddenly. And so that's kind of our story over 29 years.
Great.
You know, the first 15, there was nothing really remarkable. Just we're going to stay long obedience in the same direction. We're just going to keep on keeping on. And over time, the Lord just began to compound interest. And I really would point to, we have never sacrificed our missions giving. That we tithe on people's tithe. So our first 10%, and we average about 17% out of our general budget that just goes right to missions. And this year we up the ante. We'll be above 25% because we want to raise that bar. And it goes back to this core conviction that God's going to bless us in proportion to how we care for the poor in our city and give to missions. And so, Carey, when we gave that first $50 check, essentially what we were doing was we were standing on Luke 6:38, given it'll be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be poured into your lap, or with the measure you use, it will be measured unto you. And we're just going to keep doing that. We're going to keep doing it. And so our goal this year, I think we're targeting 3.8 million in missions giving. And what a joy. And I dream of the day that we're given 10, then 15, then 20. If that's your heart, if you are doing what is near and dear to the heart of God, I'm not worried about our bottom line because God's got our back. He has shown us that over 29 years. So that's how we're going to continue to try our best to operate. Even coming into the year, I just was at the altar praying right before the new year. And I just felt like I jotted in my journal. I felt like the Lord said, Mark, go into this year, open-hearted, open-handed, open-minded, And just watch if it's not one of those open heaven seasons. And we're experiencing it right now. We are in an Amos 9:13 moment where the plower and the reaper are catching each other, where it's a sovereign acceleration where not at liberty to talk about it, but by the time this podcast releases, I think we'll add 2 properties to our portfolio. And what's crazy is we actually won't put our name on them. We don't really intend to use them as National Community Church. We just feel like they belong in the kingdom. One is an 1886 church built by former slaves in a part of our city that only 2 churches survived building the expressway through. And it's too historic. I'm tired of developers buying these old church buildings and turning them into condos. Let's do the opposite. Let's make sure that we preserve some of these sacred spaces. And I don't think they're for us. I was outside praying in front of one of them, and I just felt like the Lord whispered, future generations will thank you. And so we think right here, right now, God is thinking nations and generations. We have a hard time believing God for cities. God says, ask of me and I will give the nation. So Lord, expand our vision. Like by definition, a God-sized dream is beyond our ability, beyond our resources, beyond our education. You can't do it, but God. But God can. And I just feel like the Holy Spirit wanted to drop that into someone's heart today. And so trusting that that'll take root, bear fruit in people's lives.
I love first of all, thank you for buying those properties. I don't know who's going to benefit. And secondly, I love the gradually and suddenly framework. That explains a lot on the positive and on the negative. You did mention something that's really important. We've talked about it with Chris, with Lead Domain on this podcast. But for those who may not be familiar with that budgeting strategy, the live off 90% of what you took in last year, can you walk us through that? Because it is you're like, well, how do you get money without a capital campaign? The answer is take out your pencils and listen to what Mark's going to tell you now.
Yeah, well, and I'll give the full story, but I want to give full credit. I was at an event, shared a car ride back to the airport with Chris Hodges, and Chris just mentioned that they budget to 90% of their previous year's income. And Carey, that was so foreign to me at first. I thought that sounds like a lack of faith. What are you doing? Because at the time, like we were blowing and going, so we would budget to maybe 112%, 117%, like whatever was happening the previous year, we would just go for it.
This plus more, right?
Yeah. So here's what happened. This was about 10 years ago. We started stepping back 1% at a time because we couldn't get there overnight. It's without letting people go. It's hard to cut 10%. So we went 99, 98, eventually got to 90%. Well, that means this year, one of the properties that we'll purchase is about a $2.1 million purchase. And here's what's fun. Our underage on expense and our overage on income from last year is 2.1 million. So literally, because of solid financial practices, we can take what was just kind of good, kind of conservative budgeting, but fiscal discipline. We can then make kind of pretty dramatic kingdom moves. And listen, and our income's nowhere near what Church of the Highlands is. But it's enough to make enough of a difference that over time, I think if you learn to budget that way, then it allows you to make some bold moves for the kingdom. And one other thing it will do, when COVID hit, we were probably down to what then, 95%, 94%. Well, we didn't take a huge hit, but for about 3 years, our giving went down for about 3 years at about a 2 to 3% clip, which listen, I am not complaining. And we bounced back this last year and back on the incline. But I didn't lose sleep because we had enough margin in the budget that we didn't have to take any drastic measures. So I think that's part of the payoff, that it kind of saves you on both sides.
It's such a gift to be able to do it that way. And just for real simple math, if you have a budget of $1 million, let's say you took in $1 million last year, your budget this year is $900,000. That's it.
Correct.
So you automatically have $100,000 in the bank by December 31st. And let's say you grew by 10%. Well, surprise, surprise, you have $200,000 in the bank by December 31st. And then the next year's budget is 90% of what you took in. And that has an effect of, suddenly or gradually and then suddenly, next thing you know, you've got $1 million extra in the bank or whatever. So I got to ask you this question too, Mark. Your energy, your passion, 29 years in, it's so strong. What keeps fueling you? Because, a lot of leaders, I was talking with some pastors, some mutual friends last week, and they were saying, a lot of pastors hit a wall at 20 years. And you're going strong, and it doesn't feel like you're hitting a wall at 29, almost 30. What are some keys to keeping your passion and your motivation and your spirit fresh over the long haul?
Yeah. Well, I have down days, Carey, and you can't lead something for 29 years and it not be a roller coaster. Yeah. So there are going to be high highs and low lows. But I have some good guardrails in place that, when I'm discouraged, I'm grateful. Have an 82-year-old spiritual father who, he and his wife, Dick and Ruth Foth, were part of our original core group of 19 people. To have someone like that in your life is a gift, because when I was super discouraged during COVID, like that's someone who could say, hey, you should have been here in 1968. Wow. So you need perspective. I would also say that you have to keep a future tense perspective. So, our first attempt at church planning failed. And, about a year into our second attempt here in DC, it wasn't looking good. And we could have quit on 19 people. But I think what you have to remember is you aren't quitting on whatever's happening present tense. You're quitting on whatever God would do future tense. So we would have been quitting on tens of thousands of people that we've had the joy of pastoring and influencing over the years. And by the way, for those pastors who are discouraged because you're not back to pre-COVID places in terms of attendance or other things, listen, don't buy the lie that you're judged in a snapshot. Ministry, along with everything else, is cumulative effect. It's the full kind of body of work, if you will, is the way it would be put in athletics. So there's a cumulative effect and a compound interest. But I think, Emily Dickinson said, dwell in possibility. And Carey, I don't know what it is. That's just the way I'm wired. Our family kind of jokes that, every day I wake up wondering if today is the day I'm going to win the lottery. And I don't even play the lottery. That's just kind of it's kind of the way I'm wired. But I've experienced too many miracles not to believe God for the next one. And I'll throw this in there. I had to get grief counseling on the heels of COVID. I didn't realize it, but we had 1,500 people evaporate into thin air when we came back a year and 2 weeks later. And it was depressing. And I didn't identify it, but a wiser, older pastor in my life said, Mark, you're experiencing grief. And just go deal with it, work through it. And Carey, I did wonder, it was a moment where I wondered, do I have one more run in me? Do I have what it takes to kind of lead us back because we stepped back about 10 years in attendance, and that's discouraging. But I will say this, we started thinking in very different categories. I mean, we're influencing in-person, online, real-time, and on-demand far more people than we were pre-COVID, but not measuring it in quite the same way, really focused on the sending capacity versus the seating capacity. And so, I just think you got to continue to focus on inputs, on the lead measures, let God take care of the lag measures, the outcomes, keep planting and watering. God will give the increase. And so it's gradually then suddenly mindset.
How is your motivation different now? Like motivating yourself. Thank you for sharing about going to grief counseling, about what happened, in 2020 and beyond. But, I was talking to Levi Lusko recently, who'll be on the podcast sharing this. And he was saying, you can't motivate yourself in your 40s the way you did in your 20s or your 30s. What's your experience with that, Mark?
Well, there's still fire shut up in my bones. Yeah. Like, I really genuinely want everybody to have a relationship with the God who created them, who knit them together in their mother's womb, who ordained all the days of their life, who's prepared good works in advance. Like, I'm so grateful that, no one else died on the cross for my sin. No one else raised on the third day. Like, Jesus is the end all and the be all. And I'm going to do my level best to, do ministry at a healthy pace, like protect the Sabbath, take a sabbatical when you can. And, I only preach 26 out of 52 weekends at this point. So there's a rhythm. So when I say empty the tank, I'm not saying burnout. I just want to make sure that I'm squeezing the time, talent, and treasure that God's given to me. And just, I'm not, the motivation is not extrinsic. That just will never last. It's got to be intrinsic. And I know that I'm doing what God's called me to do. But at this point, legacy is not what you accomplish. Legacy is what others accomplish because of you. So it's discipleship growing fruit on other people's trees. So a couple of years ago, when we decided to spin cycle our campuses, turn them into network churches, we created this thing called the Dream Collective. And we do a Renew conference in September, open invite to that. We do a cohort of pastors where pastors need pastors. I love hanging out with about 10 to 12 pastors at a time and just trying to love on them and make it less about me, less about NCC at this point, and more about, God, let your kingdom come. Let your will be done in DC as it is in heaven. And so it's a little bit wider mindset. Like a month ago, we had a couple hundred local pastors gather here at our campus. Carey, that is so hard to get pastors to other churches. But I think we have been playing the game that not about the name over the church door, about the name above all names, that somehow there's this kind of camaraderie that's happened in this city that I genuinely think we rejoice with each other. And so, yeah, it's just a little bit of a new season. And, I shared with you, we're new grandparents. That'll shift your focus as well. So you'll begin to think intergenerationally and doing what you do for the third and fourth generation.
Oh, congrats. I mean, that's exciting. One of the pressure cooker pieces that everybody lived through was the political upheaval of the last decade. And you're for anybody who hasn't visited NCC, I mean, literally, you could throw a stone at the Capitol. You're just down the road from literally blocks away from the center of power. And, I thought if there's anybody who's going to be discouraged, anybody who's going to get partisan, anybody who's going to get jacked up or get into nationalism or take a stand, like it was like you couldn't have baited more than you baited in 2024. And yet you just, maintain that neutrality and you love people. I want to know how you do that because you're in the middle of it.
Yeah. Well, we made a decision day one. We're not going to affiliate with a party or a candidate. Mm-hmm. I think that's it's a slippery slope. Yeah. And so we have maintained. Now, I want to be careful. I mean, we have had so many members of Congress, cabinet members, executive branch. Like we've had people that have attended our church that um, hold incredible positions of power. And I want to be careful to say, let's not just throw stones at DC. Let's hurl blessings. Listen, public service is not for the faint of heart these days. Like it's brutal out there because we politicize everything instead of theologizing everything. And so, Lord, raise up Esther's and Daniel's and Deborah's and Nehemiah's, people that have the courage to become public servants. And there's no denying that. Yeah, there's corruption. There's power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. There's some of that, but we feel called to serve that public sphere. And I'll also say this: God's no respecter of person. So when we turn Ebenezer's into the living room for our friends experiencing homelessness, we find equal joy. It's a theology of dignity. The image of God in me greets the image of God in you. So the ground is level at the foot of the cross is where I'm going with that, Carey. And so part of what our mindset is that, there is a hill higher than Capitol Hill. It's a hill called Calvary. There's a house that's more important than the White House. I think it's the house of prayer. And I think there's a court that's even more important than the Supreme Court. And I think it's the inner court that we have access to through what Christ accomplished on the cross. So we're going to try to stand in the gap as peacemakers, grace givers, truth tellers, tone setters. And we've been through lots of administrations. Administrations come and go. The kingdom is forever. And that's going to keep us centered. We're going to keep on keeping on. And we know the lane that God has called us to run in.
So we touched on this a little bit, but you continue to write. It's amazing. I remember a few books ago, you're like, I think this might be my last one. It took a lot out of you, but you're going and going and going and going. So I'm going to be very excited for Gradually and then Suddenly. But you've also got your latest book, which I had the privilege of endorsing, is on the subject of everyday miracles, right? A Million Little Miracles. So tell us a little bit about what's inside and why you wrote it.
Yeah, let's just have a little bit of fun. We're on a planet that's spinning at 1,000 miles an hour and speeding through space at 67,000 miles per hour. So even on a day we didn't get much done, Carey, we did travel 1.6 million miles through space.
It's insane.
And, I'm just having fun with it. But there are people who would say, I've never experienced a miracle. With all due respect, you have never not. In fact, you are one. I mean, come on, 37 sextillion biochemical reactions happening in the human body at any given moment. I didn't flip a switch this morning. 6 quarts of blood, flowing through 60,000 miles of veins, arteries, and capillaries. DNA, enough of it to stretch to the moon and back 150,000 times. So, Carey, here's where I would go with it. I'm a little tired of being made to feel foolish for believing in intelligent design when anything less violates common sense and common science. We are fearfully and wonderfully made a little lower than the angels and crowned with glory. And, the book is in part an apologetic, but I think it's also about recapturing, either you're going to take things for granted or take them for gratitude. And it's kind of recapturing gratitude for the everyday miracles that are all around us all the time.
Well, and that's what I love. If you've enjoyed the tone and the tenor and the optimism and the faith that's so evident in An Hour and a Bit with Mark Batterson, you're going to love his book. And in a very cynical age, you continue to bring hope, wonder, curiosity, awe, and it's such a gift, Mark. So thank you. The latest book is called A Million Little Miracles. It's available everywhere. Mark, if people want to find you online, where are you active these days?
Yeah, Instagram and X at Mark Batterson, markbatterson.com. If people want to maybe sample a couple of those books. They're free to do that. And Carey, it's always such a joy. It's easy having a conversation with a friend.
Oh, it's easy. Well, and
and
thanks for going there. I always, we've had so many conversations online and offline, and I've always wondered about this. And I think you helped a lot of church leaders. And I think it's a different model for things. And I love the framing of it too, right? Gradually, then suddenly. And again, this is 3 decades in an hour and 11 minutes. So just understand, if it's not happening by Christmas for you, hang in there, right?
Absolutely. And not just hang in there. Maybe the last word is enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
Like, as a parent, you gotta enjoy every age and stage. And I think that's true of leadership. I think you have to enjoy the journey and play the long game. Some good things are going to happen.
Mark, thanks for a very different take on the story of NCC and your story so far. So appreciate you, friend. Thank you.
Thanks, Carey.